So let me just first of all introduce the panelists for you. Carolyn Currie is CEO of Women's Enterprise Scotland, a chartered banker, and has worked with a variety of businesses from large corporates to the SME and not-for-profit sector. Sorry, Charlie, for the SME reference there. Jonathan Duck is CEO of Amtico, a Coventry and Atlanta-based export-led flooring manufacturer. Jonathan was previously a management consultant with Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, and also been a divisional director with Bass PLC. Alex Plant is Programme Director, Market Reform, and Head of Policy and Regulatory Strategy at Anglian Water. Before that, he was Director, Regulation and Competition Policy at Royal Mail. And finally, on our first panel, we have Philip Keller. Philip was the Chief Finance and Operating Officer of Intermediate Capital Group, PLC, until July 2019. Philip is a non-exec director of Jonglan PLC, and also of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, of the Northern Ballet, and of London Music Masters. So welcome to all four of you, and again, many thanks for joining us today. In terms of format, what I'm going to do is, first of all, pose a question to each of our four panelists and ask them to just answer it very briefly in their own words. And here's the question. What do companies need to do in your region in order to thrive in the post-pandemic and the post-Brexit era? And in no particular order, I'm going to put that question first to Jonathan. Jonathan.
Oh, thanks. So what do we need to do to thrive and recover? Well, I mean, obviously there's a bounce back going on post-COVID. So a lot of this is just kind of keeping up with the pace where you can. I think in the longer term, the main issue facing businesses in the Midlands is just to keep up the rate of investment. I think it was notable in the video at the start that the people who looked really, really productive were those who had investment behind them. And so it's maintaining that sector mix. Obviously, industrial and manufacturing businesses are close to the heart of everyone in the Midlands, and you know, they are some of the most productive companies we have.
In order to thrive, Jonathan, what are the, you know, what do they need to be doing?
Yeah, you've just got to be internationally competitive. I mean, certainly any manufacturing business, and I'm going to sort of pick that out, operates on a world stage, and you've got to be able to both export effectively and compete fully with any importers. And so that means having productivity levels that at least match and indeed better all of your competitors overseas, because many of them will have lower labour rates, lower power costs, lower land costs. So you are continually in a productivity race in order to not just survive, but also just keep growing. So productivity is absolutely key for us.
And given your focus there, Jonathan, on international, given the question that we had, which was, you know, post-Brexit as well as post-pandemic, what are your thoughts there on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is also just getting joined up. I mean, the Midlands is almost a microcosm of the wider issue because we've got some very wide regional disparities. We have a long tail of businesses with low productivity. So I think one of the activities in our regional forum is going to be to try to highlight some of those in order to draw out the wider lessons for the UK. But also, I mean, this isn't just a UK issue, it's actually a UK and Europe issue. So you've only got to look at the changing centre of gravity and where all the big companies for the future are based, you know, that they are US and Asia. And so I think there's an immense opportunity out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's not like the X-Files. The truth is out there somewhere. The truth is actually under your nose in the US and Asia. And so there's a lot of just copying some of the best practice that we see there. One obvious other route here is a lot of our issues, frankly, are self-inflicted. And just like any of us in business go into it looking for bottlenecks in order to sort of dino rod and clear out, the same sort of thing can apply to how parts of our economy operate. But we do have to make a noise to make that breakthrough.
Just briefly, Jonathan, what are you referring to there in terms of the bottlenecks, if you like?
Well, I mean, there's a whole multiplicity of overlapping bodies that sometimes confuse rather than simplify. And certainly when you compare trying to set up, for instance, a new factory in the UK versus Asia or or the US. I mean, it's complete night and day. We've got much higher factor cost inputs on labour, land, planning, energy. And I think this gets to be more of an issue, actually, as businesses become more overseas owned, because when you're fully UK owned, you can put on your national hat and go, yes, I am going to invest here. Once you're overseas owned, and of course, a lot of businesses, the big manufacturing businesses that's a consequence of running a long-term current account deficit. You've got to pay for it somehow. One of it is selling what you're doing to overseas owners. You are just one of the pack, and they will look at you quite hard just compared to what the economics are like in other countries. And so maintaining national competitiveness and making sure you can therefore attract inward investment is vital. And don't be misled by some of these funny statistics on the UK being the #1 target for foreign direct investment, because that counts your ongoing investment as though it's FDI if you happen to be overseas owned. So there's a funny game with statistics there.
Okay, so that's an interesting point, isn't it, regards overseas investment, and one we will probably come back to later. Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Let's move on to Carolyn. Carolyn Currie. Carolyn, just again, just referring to that question that we had at the beginning, what do companies need to do in your region in order to thrive in the post-pandemic, the post-Brexit era? Carolyn.
Well, in Scotland, we've got a really big ambition to have a focus on digital. So, you know, in the words of Sir Charlie, really, with that great case study, to create more cars in the north. Businesses have got an unparalleled opportunity here to harness digital. Already many businesses have benefited from digital capability. And, you know, we've heard already, whether that is operational infrastructure or whether that's a reach into new markets and new clients. Here in Scotland, businesses have opportunities to access grant funding to boost digital capability. And that is key. The ability to access investment, we have found, has been a key driver in terms of, you know, providing an incentive to step forward, to take that time to look at the opportunities for your business. So we see that here in our region as a significant opportunity, and we have a real ambition to get stuck in and to tackle that. Okay.
And again, just do you sort of echo some of the points that Jonathan made there earlier regards, you know, some of the issues that come up that companies need to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many of the other regions and the other chairs, when we've sat down and spoken together, we also see significant regional disparities here in Scotland. We are a region that has got quite differentiated geography. So, you know, we are looking at businesses that are located in very remote areas, for example, the islands, the Highlands communities, right the way through to very significant urban conurbations. And so there are a number of different challenges, there are a number of different industries and sectors in these different areas. And again, we want to address some of these disparities and look at productivity and how we can make a difference. And one of the key pieces that has come out in our discussions has been around communication, actually, about communicating a lot more effectively and precisely about what productivity means in order to harness interest, particularly from the business community, and provide that motivation and incentive to step back. Because we all know businesses are really busy, and never more so now than trying to come through a pandemic. But arguably, it's never been more important to take that time to assess and future-proof your business.
I mean, echoing what Charlie said in his speech, you know, that this was an extraordinary opportunity, and you know, companies have been able to step back. Have you actually just seen that as well, Carolyn? Have you heard maybe anecdotally that's been happening, or have you actually seen businesses do precisely that?
Yes. So, you know, I think it is very easy to hear about the tough issues in the pandemic, and they're definitely out there for business. So let's be really clear about that. However, there are businesses that have had tremendous successes at that time, that have been able to build on their capability, that have been able to access resources that perhaps weren't always available to them, to capitalise on that and to make that significant step. And what we have seen is that a lot of businesses have invested in digital and technology in order to take that step. In many cases, you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and the move of many markets online has created a much greater need to engage with these types of technology. So yes, we have seen a lot of businesses, you know, really extend their reach. They are perhaps not always businesses you might expect. So to echo Sir Charlie's analogies, for example, you know, one of the businesses we work with is a business that helps mostly students to become English teachers and to teach abroad. That business is located in a very remote area in the Highlands and has boosted its turnover significantly. It is now a multi-million-pound business. And that is, you know, just one of the examples of businesses that have really transformed their sector and have led the way forward in terms of what is possible in a sector that perhaps doesn't have a generally high turnover or perception of, you know, great GDP opportunity, for example, attached to it.
Okay. Thank you, Carolyn. Let's move on to Alex. Alex in East Anglia. Alex Plants. Alex, again, just that initial questions from which you repeated for the purposes of the audience again. What companies need to be doing in your region to thrive in a post-pandemic and post-Brexit era? Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And actually, I suppose one thing I should say, I'm wearing my badge, having just had my second jab, and the NHS proof of productivity in vaccine delivery is an interesting observation. Tells us that public sector productivity matters too. But going to the question specifically and thinking about the work we've been doing in East Anglia and the development of our green paper as part of the productivity forum, I suppose that's split across three issues. One is around the knowledge economy and skills, and we're blessed with having some of the most productive knowledge economy clusters in the country within our region. And I think it's really important in the sort of post-Brexit bit of your question that we are sending a clear message that we remain an open economy and the best place for the best brains in the world to come and live, study and work. And then that perhaps picks up one of your elements. The second key theme emerging in our green paper is around the Fens, the East Anglian Fens, where we think there's a really unique opportunity to showcase integrated adaptation and mitigation to climate change through better land use, better water management in what is the breadbasket of the UK. That can alleviate flood risk, address water scarcity, contribute to net zero, and drive productivity in an area that is underinvested, has been underinvested for a long time, and where productivity lags some of our higher performing areas in the region, and can also create a template for lowland areas globally, we think. And the third issue is around devolution. And there's a lot of conversation during the video and earlier discussions about the regional disparities. And one clear message from that for us seems to be, well, if we're not addressing those regional disparities with a kind of one-size-fits-all national approach, more devolution to all regions, at least on a par with the powers enjoyed by the Mayor of London, can enable more tailored responses to address the barriers to productivity in functional economic geographies across the country. So those are our kind of initial responses to the question set, Jim.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex. I'm sure the point about devolution again is one we'll come back to briefly. Okay, we just want to hear from Philip Keller. Philip, and again your response to that question.
Morning, everyone.
Who represents South East? Sorry, yeah. Sorry.
I feel some comfort in the familiarity of the other regions and the dynamics that we have in London and the South. But I'm particularly interested in what are the catalysts for business change. And I think this is where business and the work of the Productivity Institute can probably come together. What drives change in businesses? Because it's either events drive changes or some systemic process within businesses. And I was sort of struck by Charlie's anecdotes and the phrase "get stuck in," which is a very direct way of saying businesses need to find some way of recognizing that they need to be proactive in changing themselves and not spending all their time worrying about cash flow, fulfillment, and customer acquisition. And I think as we've pinned down the question down to how that is relevant emerging from the pandemic and moving it through the Brexit process, companies will have to move, those companies that do think about their have a systemic process for strategy and planning and improvement, will have put that on hold largely and thought about survival most of them, and now hopefully moving back again into thinking about strategy. It's very difficult to worry when you're in the eye of the storm. You have to worry about customer acquisition and cash flow. You can't necessarily think about your 5 to 10 year business model. But as an upshot of what's happened in the last year and a half is probably digital skills have enhanced, not in a controlled superstructural way, but each business has had to work out how they can best use digital resources to solve day-to-day business decisions. That's going to be a positive. As the pandemic effect dissipates, Brexit will require more long-term thinking. And my hope is that businesses will take this opportunity to start thinking about systemic processes, to constantly examine themselves, their productivity, and how they can maximize their engagement and returns to their various stakeholders being shareholders, environment, customers, staff, and so and communities. Where we perhaps can make a difference is thinking about whether there should be a pull or push model for that, because companies themselves, we need to provide resources so that if they want to engage in the constant process of change, they know that there are resources available, whether they're financial or advisory, and whether we, as an institute or as a project, wait for those resources to be requested, or have some process to go out and push those resources to make sure companies do actually engage in that in the process of constant renewal and constant change and constant interrogation. So that's obviously a very generic response that doesn't apply solely to London and the South, although I think all of my fellow panelists have referred to massive diversity within their regions. And London and the South is no exception to that. In fact, it may even be a more exaggerated model, because in financial services, we probably have some of the highest productivity levels in the world. And yet we also completely rely on a very low wage labor force in many aspects of our economy. And in a low wage labor force, particularly policies that support short-term employment, there's no incentive to think about how do we improve at least staff productivity over the long term. So I think we have a number of the same dynamics as the other regions. I think the discussion needs to be around, I think there was a very healthy discussion around how do we improve the catalyst for business change.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Okay, I'm conscious of time. We want to have a poll, so I'm going to hand over now to you, everyone listening. I think if we can put the poll question up, hopefully this will work. Let's hope it comes up. Here we go. So this is the question for everyone listening and viewing. What is #1 priority for business in order to thrive in a post-pandemic UK? Okay, so just usual computer, whatever laptop or whatever you're on, just to give your response to that question. We'll just give it a few seconds. I can also see how many people have voted. So almost half have voted now. So well over half, we're getting there. We'll just wait for the last few undecideds, although I think there's quite a clear trend appearing here. What I'm going to do as well is I'm going to go back to each panelist in a moment for their thoughts on this answer to this question. Okay, I think we're probably nearly there, aren't we now? Yeah, we've got almost more than 80% to reply, which is fantastic. So, okay, almost the same percentage for both improving skills and driving innovation. Somewhat further down, investing in infrastructure, and then beyond that, expanding to new markets, which was something Jonathan touched on before, at 9%. New investment, not so much, and no one's reducing overheads. Okay, let's go back to the panelists on these answers. Are we surprised? Jonathan, are you surprised by that answer there?
No, I mean, obviously skills, I mean, the issue on skills is that there's a classic mismatch between what's coming out of the education programme and what businesses need. And you get involved in a continual cycle that seems to have been going on for about 50 years, a discussion between business and the Department of Education. And there's kind of a miswiring there. I mean, obviously innovation and fueling the innovation and investing behind it, so it's not just a load of early startups, but things that actually grow forwards is a way into it. I mean, personally, I'd also, as you might imagine, like to see investment up there. And investment comes in two flavours, because it is investment in national infrastructure, particularly transport infrastructure, as well as investment in businesses to help the underlying cause of productivity. I mean, we're particularly affected in the Midlands area, because we've been crying out for the equivalent of a better M25 around Birmingham for about 40 years. And similarly, in parts of the Black Country, you actually can't get into Birmingham or other cities in the area except on 2 hours on public transport.
Yeah,
so
quite
simple infrastructure helps.
So quite surprising, really, to see that figure of only 12% for infrastructure. Carolyn, what do you feel about those results? Is it what you would expect?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I think innovation is absolutely critical. And I do think as well, many of the business we are speaking to in the context of the pandemic have got innovation, really at the front of their mind. And, absolutely, as Jonathan says, that mismatch between skills at that key point where you're taking on employees. I mean, for a small business, taking on staff is a big step, and it's a critical step. It's a real milestone. And you are looking often for staff that have very particular skills or have the capability to gain those very particular skills pretty quickly to make a real contribution. And often that is a key issue.
Sorry, Carolyn. First, to Jonathan's point there, this isn't new, is it? This is 50 years of discussion. And also Charlie mentioned, didn't he, at the beginning of his lecture, that explanations don't provide practical solutions. This sort of constant debate. And I think perhaps, is this not finally an opportunity, given what's happened over the last 18 months, to really address these in a fashion which actually gets results?
It definitely is. I mean, the discussions and the debate have been going on, and they are an important part of this. No, we've not cracked it yet, but we need to keep talking and have that motivation to actually address it. But the other part, I think, is looking for those best practice studies. Where have businesses brought on staff who perhaps didn't have the right capability? How have they created the environment for those staff to succeed and for the business to succeed? And I think you can see some of those best practices often actually in rural and more remote areas, where traditionally you just can't access the staff that have the skills that best align to the industry or the sector that you're in. So therefore you have to be entrepreneurial in how you address that. And I think there will be some best practice case studies in there that we can examine and we can really learn from. And in terms of innovation, I mean, it is just critical, isn't it? Now more than ever, we've seen so many big brands go out of business during the pandemic. Nobody can not invest in innovation at this point in time. And again, we have seen a lot of really interesting developments, particularly around data collection, data usage, to inform some of that application of innovation. And I think that's really important, harnessing that data, that knowledge and that insight, so that investments that are made, the innovations that are identified, are productive.
Yeah, indeed. And that again echoes Charlie's point, doesn't it, around the successful businesses are those who actually are planning X years ahead and have actually picked up on those future trends, and by that innovation they can do that. Alex,
I just want to say I am a huge fan of strategy and taking time out, because you cannot say this enough. If you do not know where you want to get to in the future, how are you going to identify those key opportunities that come your way? And that is critically important. Sorry.
Well said. Alex, your views on the poll, and perhaps that last point that Carolyn mentioned as well there, pick up on that.
Yeah, so I suppose I'm not surprised by the poll. It's a slightly artificial poll though, isn't it? Because we know that the drivers of productivity, kind of stretch across all the things in the poll. And if you go back to the way we thought about this in my HM Treasury days, we were looking at competition, enterprise, investment, skills, innovation, and recognizing that all needed to come together if we're going to get the answer to the productivity puzzle. But before coming back to the point that Carolyn finished on, I would go back to this point that you heard Jonathan talking really, really clearly about some of the particular needs in his region. And there's an understanding of that will sit, because Jonathan lives and works and is kind of struggling with the challenges of that particular geography. The understanding of what the right answer is and the particular kind of different mix of issues is better known and understood and should be decided within that region. So my earlier point on devolution is I could give you the same list of things that are particularly relevant for East Anglia. There will be some overlap, but there'll be some things that are different. And tailoring things to the particular needs is the critical point I think we need to get to through this work. I think we did good work in the Treasury looking at the productivity question 20 years ago at a national level, and some changes we made, including things like the competition regime, were really important kind of bedrock for that. Now we need to kind of get a bit more surgical and understand what we're doing at the regional level, and that must mean devolution of powers and funding. Just coming back to Carolyn's point, though, could not agree more. And I think it is absolutely the case that if at the firm level people aren't taking the time to think about the long-term direction, the trends, and how it is that they are setting themselves up to address those and communicate that clearly to everyone working in the firm, whether that be investors, whether that be colleagues, then you're not going to get the kind of improvement in productivity the very best firms show. And the great example we had of Carl's pasties, which I've just looked up, and I've now ordered my 4 cheese onion.
You're going to be rush on pasties.
I'm boosting their out of region delivery in one go. So yeah, absolutely, that must be critical too.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And Philip, your thoughts again on that poll and some of those points that the other panelists have made in response.
Well, I was looking back at my notes from our regional forum. There's a lot of consistency. There's the physical and digital infrastructure, and also particularly intermediate skills in London and the South, where we think are lacking. Well, I referred to that a little bit, or alluded to that a moment ago. Finance, which came quite low in the poll, was actually an area we discussed quite extensively, and not just the access to financing is pretty limited. There's a lot of access to financing to support existing cash flows. There's not a lot of financing to support speculative or growing cash flows due to investment or innovation. So that needs to be available, plus the advice and the structure around how do you apply for that, and how does a company think about risk when they're taking on projects to innovate and to become more productive. How do they think about risk? How do they think about financial risk and therefore financing risk? So I think some of those discussions that we had were consistent with the poll, although financing was probably a bigger part of our discussion. In terms of the points around how do businesses act and promote change, and this slightly refers back to what I said earlier around what's the catalyst for change, because most businesses don't, an awful lot of the businesses that employ 75% of the UK workforce don't have a systemic process for thinking about, to examine how they can be better. They spend a lot of time making sure they can get by. And how can we promote, as an institute or as a body of business leaders, promote that discussion? Because you can't just send an email to everyone and say, please strategize next Wednesday. There needs to be some way we can help in some small way, and hopefully in a way that then explodes out. Starting at a regional level, think about how can we promote those discussions where they are currently not happening, so that we can access all of that pool of latent productivity gain that companies aren't managing because of their own time constraints and the way they're viewing their survival at the moment, perhaps, to move from survival to strategy.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Well, I'm conscious of our time and we're almost up, unfortunately. But again, we could have, I'm sure, discussed these points all morning. In fact, in our second panel later this morning, we're actually going to be looking at what are the most important policy measures that are needed to actually achieve these priorities that were listed there. So we can, following on from this discussion. But can I just personally thank the four of you for your time today and for taking part in this discussion. Apologies, it's a little brief, but we have a tight schedule today of events and lectures. So but it's been great to hear from you all across the country.